Hello and assalamualaikum. Welcome back to the Desi Power Hub podcast. I'm Abir and I'm here with Adan, and we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. So, in simple words, imposter syndrome is the persistent doubt about your abilities and your accomplishments despite evidence on the contrary. It's the feeling of being feeling like a fraud or a fake even when you're successful. So, we're going to run you through this topic on what are the pros, not a lot, but what are the cons and where does this arise from and how you can overcome it. So, Adam, would you mind telling us about what kind of feelings are associated with imposter syndromes? And then you guys can check if you resonate with any of those.
Yeah, so when we're talking about imposter syndrome, I think one thing that we can all agree on is that it is associated mainly with a feeling of self-doubt, which means that you feel like you are somehow lacking in your abilities, in your skills, or in your knowledge, or in any of your competences, in a specific situation. And there can be many reasons for that, and there can also be a number of attitudes or behaviors that can stem from that. So, for example, there is fear of failure because आप नहीं चाहते कि आपको कोई भी ऐसी एविडेंस मिले जो आपको ये बता रही है कि you cannot succeed or that you are a failure. So that is another thing that comes from imposter syndrome because you feel like that if you try and fail, then everyone else is going to find out that you are not as good as they are, that you are a failure. And uh,
You're not as good as they think you are.
Exactly. And for the same reason, at times you also exhibit perfectionist tendencies, which means that you don't undertake tasks unless you're sure that you are gonna produce a perfect result. And if it's anything less than perfection, that then you're gonna have negative feelings, even if what you can do is great. But because it's not your definition of perfect, you're gonna be reluctant to undertake that task.
So, yeah, these were some of the signs that you might be someone who has imposter syndrome or like associate with that. But other feelings that I personally them was like feeling like your achievements are out of luck and that your failures are always your fault, but your achievements are something that's from the universe. You couldn't do anything about it. You'll be found out as a fraud and you never deserved all of this anyways. I feel like these feelings sometimes can push you to be better so that you don't feel less than, but in itself, it's a persistent feeling that
Mhm.
will always end up with you being hurt. It's not gonna stop essentially, and you'll never, because you're working not from a love for yourself, but you're working from like a hate that comes from within, that you always feel like you're less than. And there's essentially a difference between working hard on your skills versus undermining your efforts and skills, right, Adan?
Exactly, exactly. Especially we've all heard of it, most of our audience, I'm sure they've heard of this saying that once you start believing that you're really great at something or you're the best at something, that's when you stop growing. And of course, that mindset in its place is very right, but that is a different, being humble about your abilities is different than being self-deprecating about what you think about your abilities. So you need to make sure that where at one hand, of course, you need to always have a growth mindset, always need to keep growing, but at the same time, make sure that you're not undermining your skills, right? Because there's a lot of negative consequences that come from that.
We can go over some of the cons of imposter syndrome and, the way it might pull you down in regular
For
life.
sure. So, we were talking about self-doubt, right? And the first main negative consequence of having imposter syndrome is exactly this, that you undermine your work. You think that you're not good enough, that you're not competent enough. And as a result of that, you have low self-esteem, you have negative self-belief. And self-belief, having a solid self-belief is so important because it's only when you have a strong faith in your abilities that you undertake challenges, right? If you feel like that, yes, you can, you have what it takes to undertake, you have what it takes to take on this challenge, that's when you go ahead and take on that challenge, right? If you don't
Exactly.
have that faith in yourself, what's going to happen as a result of that is that you're going to aim for lesser. Because, and I can give some examples to explain that, right? So, for example, in our professional lives, what happens is that when we're applying for different jobs, Sometimes there are certain positions that we think are really attractive, or certain workplaces that we think are really good. But if we have imposter syndrome, we're gonna think, oh my god, this person, they're gonna find out that I'm not good enough for this job. And because of that, many times people don't even apply for those positions and those roles that they could get because they have what it takes. And similarly, if for university students, what happens as a result of that is, like many times they just feel like they don't have what it takes to really do really well in complex and complicated tasks. Like this could be academic tasks, and this could be extracurriculars like applying for a senior position in a society. So people, when they have imposter syndrome, they just want to avoid any of those situations which kind of put them at the risk of failure. And of course, like just because of that, they just don't aim high, and when they don't aim high, they achieve less.
Definitely. And I feel like the second major con for imposter syndrome could be that it hugely impacts your relationships with others. On one hand, because you have imposter syndrome, you're going to view others with the same lens. So you're going to be very judgmental of others. You
Uh-huh.
might undermine their successes. And if they make a slip up, you might think, oh, it's just, they're like me. They just are not capable. So that
Mhm.
doesn't serve to make a good relationship in the long run. And on the flip side, you could also like display such depreciative behaviors of yourself, and you're just displaying to them that you're very insecure, that this person might treat you like a doormat eventually. And then you're at a lower rank in their relationship because you always feel like you need to be the one who's more humble, who looks up to other people, because you're not the real deal, they're the real deal, right?
Right. And, this is such an important thing. And I feel like I said, this just goes on to show how our relationship with ourselves impacts our relationships with and our interactions with other people. Because essentially, these sorts of behaviors stem from how we treat ourselves. So when we have these negative beliefs and these limiting beliefs are about ourselves, of course, as a consequence of that, not only we're being negative in our interactions with other people, but we're also being negative towards our own self. Because if we don't respect ourselves and if we don't love ourselves enough, then that is going to manifest in what we do in our day-to-day lives. For example, if we think that don't we don't deserve great things, we're not going to take care of ourselves good, right? So, for example, we might not go to a gym, for example, when we can, and have this ideal body that we could aim for. And instead, we're just engaging in unhealthy activities because we just feel like that we don't deserve great things.
It's essentially coming out from a point of self-doubt, right? Because you feel like you won't be good enough, so why try? Like, why put yourself out there? And you're always scared to, because your efforts don't like emerge from a place of love, it emerges from a place of hate. So you will always be stuck in a negative rat race where you always feel like you're never good enough, you negative self-talk to yourself, and down the road eventually that's going to lead to a lot of burnout. On the other hand, if you did it out of love, down the road, if you're working in a gym, you would have a much better, healthier body. You would have healthier joints and whatnot. If it's your career, you would have a much higher position because you'd be able to negotiate your own worth. You'd be able to stand up for your own rights in front of peers or your
Mhm.
own boss. And in relationships, you won't take a lower position in front of someone else. You'll be able
Yeah.
to explain why you deserve to be treated like a human, and you'll be able to appreciate all your achievements. You won't like listen to people when they like आपके achievements को सारे गिराते रहते हैं. You won't take that. You won't take their
Yeah.
word for that.
Yeah, for sure. They say that you teach people how to treat you. And of course, if you have these negative beliefs about yourself, it's gonna show up in what you're teaching people about treating
Exactly.
you, right? So yeah, and
Yeah.
what's interesting is, Abir, that this the place where imposter syndrome comes from is actually goes back to our childhood for a large part. In our childhood, and I came across a very interesting TED talk on this topic, and the person was talking about how sometimes when parents are really busy, they can be negligent towards their children, or they can be, let's say, the child is asking for something and the parent is worried about a lot of other added problems that they're in, of course, that's going on in their head. And because of any of those problems, they are maybe, they respond to their child in a disdainful or in a dismissing manner. But what that communicates to that child is that, you're not important enough to get my attention, or maybe you're not good enough for whatever that you're asking for. And so this is where children essentially learn from. We learn from our parents about our worth. And there's a lot of psychological
Exactly.
work on that as well. So that's where these beliefs, of course, growing up, no one tells us that, your parent was worried about this thing. That's why they behave in that way. It's not about you, it's about your parents. But children,
This could also be
yeah,
applicable to your siblings or to your classmates who, may be more popular than you and have more friends, and then you just feel like you're just not worth listening. You're not worth their attention, and something's wrong with you. You're just born this way.
exactly, especially the adults, and then of course our social groups that we have as children as well. And let's say that if we have things like bullying going on in our lives at those ages, then of course, like, we start wondering that why is it that we deserve to be treated this way? So children start to internalize those negative beliefs about themselves, and they stay when they grow up,
Exactly.
they manifest in forms of imposter syndrome.
And it's I feel like it also stems from a place where we compare a lot in our culture. मतलब parents do this, मतलब वो अपने बच्चों को हमेशा बताते हैं कि yes, or kid did this, or kid did this, he got this many grades, oh my gosh, look at him, he's receiving all these awards at such a young age. And then I feel like वो comparison culture की वजह से थोड़ा सा you feel like you have to live up to that, and you feel like, oh, अंदर से I'm not this, but people want me to live up to that, so वो fake image रख के ना, it clashes with your own identity कि you are allowed to make mistakes, but
Yeah.
with that you think you can't.
Exactly. And it's reminding me of this research where children who were not afraid to fail, like it's reminding me of this whole research on appreciating effort versus appreciating goals. So when children are appreciated on the results that they're getting, they fall into this mindset of being afraid to undertake big challenges. On the other hand, if you appreciate their efforts, then they don't have to put up faces, right? Because it's about the effort and they are putting in effort. So it's not really about the
Exactly.
results. But when it's about the results,
Exactly.
that's when it becomes about putting up faces. So
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Like
And
किसी को तारीफ इस बात पे करना कि you put in the effort versus किसी को तारीफ इस बात पे करना कि you got an A is totally different. A
yeah,
person can get varying amounts of grades based on, their environment at home, their school
100%.
environment, how they were feeling, उन्होंने किस तरह से पढ़ाई की. But if they put in their best, they can know that हाँ मैंने अपनी full कोशिश की, and that is something to be appreciated. And I feel like this also stems from personal experiences because I had to face that a lot. I was a kid जो
Mhm,
नहीं इतना अच्छा पढ़ती थी, and they didn't really see a future for me in a
mhm,
good field or whatever, and that really adds up because you start
mhm.
believing that and you're like, oh, मैं तो कभी कर ही नहीं सकती. And
Yeah.
until I actually got like कोई अच्छे grades, I always had that feeling, and those अच्छे grades were like life changing for me because each time I would have this like imposter syndrome while I self doubts, I could look back at those grades and be like, I did that once. It was me. I can do it again, right?
Uh-huh. Mhm.
But agar if you have too much of this imposter syndrome, you could just keep on thinking, nahi, that was just a fraud. Actually, मैंने भी ये सोचा था. That was just a trick to why it was out of luck. But when you see your successes line up, eventually you do feel like, yeah, you're able to do this.
100%. And Abir, I just want to say it here. I mean, of course, like I've known a lot of people and I know a lot of people, but I just want to say this that you are one of the most competent people that I know. You're very smart and you're very hardworking and you inspire me in many ways. Right. And
Oh my
this
god.
thing that, yeah,
I could say, am I? Am I?
Yeah, I know because like we said, ये जो negative beliefs बचपन में हम पकड़ लेते हैं from our parents or from the situations that we grew up in, they're really hard to let go of. And for me,
Yeah.
I learned, as soon as I learned about how childhood impacts your psychology, that's when I was like, oh wait, I had a lot going on in my childhood, so that means I need to change a lot of things about how I think about myself. And it's really about
Yeah.
thinking habits. In beginning, it seems very unnatural because our brain has these thinking paths which take time to change. So in beginning, it feels unnatural when you try to tell yourself positive things about yourself. try to tell yourself that, oh my God, you are a confident person. It's not, things are not happening out of sheer luck or something like that. And yeah, I think that brings us to, talking about how we can overcome imposter syndrome. So would you like to share your
Yeah,
experience?
it's essentially like you said, faking it till you make it, because
Exactly.
that's that's what I did. I just kept on tricking myself into believing, no, I am able to do this because I did it before, I can do it again. That's why previous successes are so important. But if you keep on acting like you're confident, if you keep on acting like, oh my gosh, I'm amazing, I can do this, even if you don't believe it internally, when you see people believing it, it will subconsciously start to reflect in your own perception of yourself,
That's true.
because
That's
that's what we're supposed to do, right? Over time, this might seem a little bit negative trying to fake it, but over time you'll be able to internalize that by yourself, because our impression is essentially what we see reflected in other people's eyes, right?
100%. I mean, I just, before I mean, talk more about it, I just want to add this thing that it's not necessarily negative. Even religion में अगर हम देखें तो जैसे इमाम अली
Hmm.
said कि at times जब हमें लगता है कि हमारे पास कोई strength नहीं है ना, so it he said कि you become like the people that you pretend to be like. So that's what it is. Like, just pretend to be like the confident, self-assured self, and that then you'll become that self, right?
Yeah. In fact, Jinnah ki bhi hai, I think Jinnah ki quote hai, I'm not really 100% sure. But it's like he says that make a decision, but once you make it, stick to it.
Like a man. I think yeah, it's something like I think it was something like a something that you can put all the thought you want to making
Yeah,
decision, but once you made the
making a
decision, you stick with
decision.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, but once you make it, you stick to it, stand by it.
Exactly. So it's essentially a decision to be on your side, a decision to believe in yourself, even when all the evidence or the people outside are telling you, maybe, just suggesting,
Yeah,
raising concern, threatening your self worth, whatever. But if no one else is on your side, in the end, you still have to be on your side, make that decision, and then stick with it. Because, of course,
yeah,
the circumstances are not in our control. हम नहीं predict कर सकते कि हमारा सक्सेस रेट क्या होगा या हमारे इर्द गिर्द के लोग हमें कब सपोर्ट करेंगे कैसे रिएक्ट करेंगे द ओनली थिंग दैट वी कैन कंट्रोल इज आवर सपोर्ट फॉर आवर सेल्फ so
yeah.
that is very important. I do want to add that with that, of course, like you said कि हम क्योंकि humans are social beings, right? हम it's very important for us कि हमारे इर्द गिर्द के लोग हमारे बारे में क्या सोच रहे हैं हमें कैसे ट्रीट कर रहे हैं. And I just want to say कि because of that, it's very important कि आपके friends कौन है, what kind of circle that you're in. You need to have people around you who are supportive of you, who who restore your faith in yourself on days when it's hard, right? So even it can only be one person, even, the more the better, of course, but even one person is more than enough, you know.
Hmm, definitely. But those people, it's very important to go to the right person. If you go to the wrong person,
Okay.
they have the key to basically wreck your life. So you have to be careful with that.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah. And I feel like as a Muslim, हमारी ideology भी ये है ना कि you put in the work, you take the steps that are needed to succeed, और बाकी outcome separate that. Like leave that to
Yeah,
Allah Ta'ala.
that is true. Exactly. As long as your intentions are good or
Yeah.
you're giving
So
your
I
best.
think another important thing is when you're failing on something, also give yourself possible reasons that you could have caused that could have caused that failure that may not be your fault. So this is a funny story that relates to both me personally, but then also me in the lab. So when I'm doing experiments and stuff,
Yeah.
and it's like when I was making this banana cake, I was following this recipe, trying to make it for the first time. It was horrible. It was so bad that I just, I grabbed some butter and just ate it by myself without showing it to anybody. It was so bad, that banana cake. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's something I did. I messed it up and I did it
Oh,
again and I
uh-huh.
made it again. Each
Right.
time it tasted so bad, and I thought there's something definitely wrong with me. Why am I not doing this the right way? It wasn't until the third time that I realized, oh, wait, it might not be my fault. It might actually just be the recipe. And so I changed the recipe, and the banana cake was amazing.
Right. Right. I mean, what I want to say is that That's so true. Like you need to differentiate from your effort and the factors that are out of your control, right? So with things like this, it's that if you're putting your best effort, you should never blame yourself, in my opinion, because what more can you do than putting your best effort? And you're already doing that, so be proud of that. And of course, the more you try, the more likely you are to find के fault किस area में हो रही है and then improving that. I just want to share a personal example on that. For example, I'm working in the education sector, and you need this mindset when you're working in a sector as problem ridden as education in Pakistan, because आपको पता है कि this is a solution that you're trying, but many times the solution is gonna fail, right? आपको नहीं and it's not because you are a failure, but because problems इतनी ज्यादा हैं कि you can never tell कि कौन सा solution succeed करेगा, because it's a very very volatile environment. But अगर आप उस failure को अपना failure लेके बैठ जाओगे, तो that means your efforts gonna stop there. But if you understand, but instead, मतलब I know that personally I would never be discouraged by me failing in a situation like that, because in that situation failing is just telling me what I don't need to do to increase my chances of
Yeah.
success. Yeah,
And I think that's why you need to celebrate your achievements,
yeah.
right?
Even if they're very small. And you need to celebrate your
Yeah.
effort as well.
Because I feel like when you start celebrating your achievements and your effort, actually, you start seeing all of it in a positive light. So if you got good grades and you're like, oh my God, that was just a fluke. It might not happen again. Somebody got my papers mixed up. Somebody just got my name mixed up and they're just telling me fake news. If you start celebrating your achievement, you're essentially just telling yourself, accepting, internalizing that you were able to do that by the help of Allah. And you will be able to do that in the future too. So celebrating your achievements is very important, and it's essential that we don't fear failure, because in the end, if you keep on trying, eventually you'll end up being successful. But if you never try, you'll never get to it anyways.
Exactly.
So basically, we talked about imposter syndrome today and what cons they could be associated with, what feelings are associated with imposter syndrome, and how you can overcome it, right? So, conclusively, just have more faith in yourself. And if you struggle with that, just fake it till you make it. I've done it, and you can do it too. It takes time to change your thinking pattern, so just be patient with yourself and make an effort out of love from yourself. Don't like depreciate all of your achievements, all of your effort, all of your hard work. Always be a good Muslim, always appreciate your efforts, and always keep on working hard towards your goal.